How the Nile created one of the world's most powerful civilizations. Close your eyes and imagine the Earth about 7,000 years ago. Where today stretch the endless sands of the Sahara, there once existed a completely different world. In place of waterless dunes grew thick grasses, rivers flowed, and numerous lakes attracted herds of antelopes, giraffes, elephants, and hippos. People lived in small communities, hunted, fished, and did not yet suspect that it was on these lands that one of the greatest civilizations in human history would soon be born. Ancient Egypt did not emerge in a single day. Its history began long before the appearance of the first pharaohs, pyramids, and majestic temples. It began with nature. About 8,000 years ago, the climate of North Africa began to change gradually. Rains fell less and less often, lakes dried up, and fertile savannas slowly turned into desert. For people, this meant only one thing. They had to look for new places where they could survive. Such a place became a single river, the Nile. Every year, its waters overflowed their banks, leaving behind a thick layer of fertile silt. Where drought reigned all around, a narrow green strip of life emerged along the banks of the Nile. That is why the ancient Greek historian Herodotus would say many centuries later the famous phrase, "Egypt is the gift of the Nile." And that was no exaggeration. Without this river, there would be no cities, no temples, no pyramids. Almost all life of the future civilization depended on its annual floods. The first settlers gradually understood the pattern of nature. After the water receded, they sowed grain in the soft black soil. A few months later, they harvested a crop that was enough not only for their own family, but also for exchange with other settlements. Thus, people first began to abandon a nomadic way of life. Instead of temporary camps, permanent villages emerged. Eventually, craftsmen appeared who made pottery, stone axes, and jewelry. Others specialized in agriculture, fishing, or construction. Thus, a division of labor gradually emerged, one of the main signs of a future civilization. Centuries passed. Settlements became larger, and their inhabitants traded with each other more and more often. The Nile became the main road of the country. If today roads and highways connect cities, then 5,000 years ago, it was the river that performed this role. Grain, wood, stone, livestock, and people were transported along it. It was the Nile that united separate communities into a single world. However, life by the great river was not as simple as it might seem. The annual flood brought life only when the water rose to the right level. If the flood was too weak, the fields dried up, the harvest died, and people faced hungry years. If the water rose too high, it destroyed homes and ruined crops. That is why the Egyptians carefully observed the Nile. They learned to predict the time of its flooding, built canals, dams, and reservoirs for storing water. Over time, this knowledge became so important that it contributed to the development of mathematics, astronomy, and the calendar. In fact, the need to control the river became one of the first steps toward the development of science. Around the 4th millennium BC, dozens of large settlements already existed along the Nile. Each had its own ruler, its own traditions, and its own gods. Over time, these territories turned into two large kingdoms. Upper Egypt emerged in the south. In the north, where the Nile split into many branches before flowing into the Mediterranean Sea, Lower Egypt was formed. Despite the names, Upper Egypt was located further south. This is explained by the direction of the Nile's flow. It flows from south to north. For a long time, these two kingdoms existed separately. They traded, formed alliances, but sometimes also fought each other. Each sought to control the entire Nile Valley, as it was the source of life. Around 3100 BC, a ruler appeared on the historical stage whose name would remain in history forever: Narmer. Most historians consider him the first pharaoh of a unified Egypt. After a series of military campaigns, he united Upper and Lower Egypt under the rule of one leader. In honor of this event, Narmer began to wear a double crown: the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt. Since then, it became a symbol of the state's unity. Many researchers consider this very moment the birth of ancient Egypt. However, ruling such a large country was not easy. It was necessary to collect taxes, build canals, distribute grain reserves, organize the labor of thousands of people, and maintain order. For this, the ruler's power alone was no longer enough. Officials, scribes, engineers, and craftsmen were needed. It was then that one of the most effective state systems of the ancient world began to form. Scribes occupied a special place in it. They were among the few people who knew how to read and write. They recorded the pharaoh's orders, kept track of the harvest, compiled tax lists, and preserved the country's history. Without them, the state simply could not exist. It was at this time that another symbol of Egypt was born: hieroglyphs. At first glance, they seem like just beautiful drawings. But for the ancient Egyptians, it was a complex writing system that combined signs, sounds, and whole words. It allowed knowledge to be passed on to future generations, and thanks to this, the history of Egypt has been preserved for thousands of years. Grand achievements awaited the country ahead: the construction of the first stone temples, the emergence of powerful dynasties, the appearance of pyramids, which remain one of humanity's greatest engineering achievements even today. But that is the next chapter of our journey. The Age of Pyramids: how Egypt became the most powerful state of its time when Narmer united Upper and Lower Egypt. He could hardly have imagined that he was laying the foundation for a state that would last for over 3,000 years. It was one of the most enduring civilizations in human history. However, at the beginning of its existence, Egypt did not yet have the majestic pyramids or grand temples that have become its symbols today. The first pharaohs were primarily concerned with strengthening the state. They built canals, expanded arable land, organized tax collection, and created a management system that allowed them to control thousands of kilometers of the Nile Valley. For its time, it was one of the most efficient state administrations in the world. The pharaoh was considered more than just a ruler. Ancient Egyptians believed he was a mediator between people and the gods. They were convinced that harvests, the flooding of the Nile, the country's prosperity, and even order in the universe depended on his decisions. That is why the death of a pharaoh was not perceived as the end of his life. The Egyptians were certain that after death, a person continues to exist in another world. But for this, it was necessary to preserve the body. Thus arose one of the most famous traditions of ancient Egypt: mummification. The embalming process was extremely complex. Priests carefully removed internal organs, which were placed in special canopic jars. The body was dried with natural salt, natron, after which every part of it was wrapped in dozens of meters of linen bandages. The entire procedure could take about 70 days. Along with the mummy, furniture, jewelry, weapons, food, clothing, and even board games were placed in the tomb. It was believed that the ruler would need all of this in the afterlife. The first tombs of the pharaohs were quite simple. They were called mastabas, rectangular structures with sloping walls, built from sun-dried bricks. But with each generation, rulers sought to leave behind an increasingly grand memory. A turning point was the appearance of Pharaoh Djoser. He ruled approximately 4,700 years ago and went down in history not only as a successful ruler, but also as a person under whom one of the most ambitious construction projects of the ancient world was realized. His chief advisor was Imhotep, an outstanding architect, engineer, physician, and scientist. Many historians call him the first person in history whose name has been preserved as an architect. It was Imhotep who proposed a revolutionary idea. Instead of a regular mastaba, he decided to place one mastaba on top of another, gradually decreasing their size. Thus was born the famous step pyramid at Saqqara. Its height exceeded 60 meters, which for its time was an almost incredible achievement. It became the first large stone structure in human history. The construction of the pyramid changed more than just architecture. It showed that Egypt already possessed a powerful organization of labor. Thousands of people quarried stone, transported it along the Nile, processed it, and installed it with amazing precision. This required engineers, craftsmen, scribes, doctors, cooks, and numerous workers. That is why modern archaeologists increasingly reject the old myth that the pyramids were built by slaves. Settlements of builders were found next to the pyramids. They lived in specially built houses, received food, medical care, and wages. Most of them were ordinary Egyptian villagers who worked on state construction projects during periods when the fields were flooded by the Nile and agricultural work was temporarily suspended. A few generations later, the era began that is known today as the Age of the Great Pyramids. The most famous figure of this time was Pharaoh Khufu, better known by his Greek name Cheops. It was for him that the Great Pyramid of Giza was built. Even today, it impresses with its scale. Its original height was almost 147 meters. For nearly 4,000 years, it remained the tallest structure created by man. About 2.5 million stone blocks were used for the construction. Most of them weighed between 2 and 3 tons, but some reached weights of over 50 tons. It remains a subject of scientific debate exactly how the ancient Egyptians lifted such huge stones to a significant height. Archaeologists put forward various versions: straight embankment ramps, spiral ramps, wooden sleds pulled over moistened sand, or a combination of several methods. Despite decades of research, there is no definitive answer yet. Alongside the Great Pyramid, the pyramids of Khufu and Menkaure were erected. Together, they formed one of the most famous architectural complexes on the planet. Nearby towers another mystery of ancient Egypt, the Great Sphinx. The huge statue with the body of a lion and a human head has been looking to the east for over 4,500 years. Despite numerous studies, historians still argue about who exactly it depicts and what symbolic meaning it had for the ancient Egyptians. It was during this period that Egypt experienced its first great flourishing. Its lands were rich, harvests were generous, and the pharaohs had enough resources to build structures that still amaze humanity today. But no powerful state remains strong forever. Gradually, internal disputes intensified, local rulers began to demand more autonomy, and several failed Nile floods led to famine and economic difficulties. A time of great trials had arrived. It seemed that the greatness of ancient Egypt was a thing of the past. However, this was only the beginning of a new chapter in its history. The golden age of the pharaohs, when Egypt ruled a significant part of the known world. When the era of the Great Pyramids ended, it might have seemed that the best times of ancient Egypt were already behind it. For several centuries, the country experienced internal conflicts, power struggles, and crop failures. Local rulers acted independently more and more often, and the central government lost control over the state. However, the history of Egypt was only preparing for its greatest flourishing. Around the 21st century BC, the country reunited once again. A period began that historians call the Middle Kingdom. Irrigation systems were restored, agriculture was expanded, and new trade routes were opened to Nubia, the Levant, and the Red Sea coast. Egypt became wealthy again, but the peace did not last long. Around the 17th century BC, the Hyksos, a people who arrived from Western Asia, invaded the north of the country. They brought with them things the Egyptians had barely used: war chariots, complex composite bows, and new types of bronze weapons. For Egypt, this was a real shock. For nearly a century, part of the country was under the rule of the invaders. But it was this defeat that changed the future of the state. The Egyptians quickly adopted the new military technologies, learned to build their own chariots, and created one of the strongest armies of their time. It was then that the era of the New Kingdom began, the period of ancient Egypt's greatest power. Pharaohs were no longer limited to defending their own borders. They began to lead major conquest campaigns themselves. One of the first great rulers of the new era was Thutmose III, who finally expelled the Hyksos and restored the country's independence. It was with him that a new dynasty began, which turned Egypt into a true empire. After him, power was inherited by a person whose story still surprises researchers today: Hatshepsut. She was one of the few women who officially became pharaohs. In a society where supreme power almost always belonged to men, this seemed impossible. To strengthen her authority, Hatshepsut even ordered herself to be depicted with a traditional royal beard, a symbol of pharaonic power. However, her reign is remembered not for wars, but for peace and development. It was under Hatshepsut that the famous expedition to the mysterious land of Punt was organized. They brought back gold, ebony, incense, ivory, exotic animals, and even live frankincense trees, which they tried to grow in Egypt. Today, historians still argue about where exactly the land of Punt was located. Most likely, it was the territory of modern Eritrea, Somalia, or eastern Sudan. After Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III took power. He is often called the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. During his reign, he conducted over 15 major military campaigns and significantly expanded the state's territory. Egypt controlled lands from modern Syria to the Fourth Cataract of the Nile in Nubia. Gold, copper, precious stones, timber, livestock, and numerous goods from the conquered territories flowed into his capital. It was then that Egypt became one of the most influential states in the world. But even more than by its military victories, the country impressed with its construction projects. In Karnak and Luxor, grandiose temples were built, decorated with hundreds of columns and huge statues. Even today, these complexes are considered some of the most outstanding monuments of world architecture. Egyptian craftsmen already knew how to carve giant obelisks from solid granite. Some of them weighed over 300 tons. They were transported along the Nile on specially built barges, an engineering achievement that still inspires admiration today. However, the most mysterious period of history came during the reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten. He did what none of his predecessors dared to do. Akhenaten declared that the main god of the country should be only Aten, the god of the solar disk. In fact, this was an attempt to replace traditional polytheism with an almost singular state cult. The pharaoh even ordered the construction of a new capital, Akhenaten. Many temples of the old gods were closed. The priests lost their power. For that time, it was a true religious revolution. But after Akhenaten's death, most of his reforms were quickly abolished. It was then that one of the world's most famous pharaohs ascended the throne, Tutankhamun. In reality, he ruled for only about 9 years and did not have time to carry out major reforms. His name became famous for a completely different reason. In 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the almost untouched tomb of Tutankhamun. Inside were thousands of objects made of gold, precious stones, weapons, furniture, chariots, and the famous golden burial mask, which is today one of the most well-known symbols of ancient Egypt. After the discovery of the tomb, the whole world began talking about the so-called curse of the pharaohs. Newspapers wrote that people associated with the excavations were haunted by mysterious deaths. However, modern historians have not found convincing evidence of the existence of any curse. Most likely, this story arose due to sensational newspaper publications of the early 20th century. After Tutankhamun, one of the greatest rulers of ancient Egypt stepped onto the historical stage, Ramesses II. He ruled for over 60 years, longer than most other pharaohs. By his order, grandiose temples were built in Abu Simbel, along with huge statues and dozens of monuments across the country. It was Ramesses II who participated in the famous Battle of Kadesh against the Hittite Empire. Although both sides declared themselves winners, the battle ended without a decisive result. Eventually, Egypt and the Hittites concluded a peace treaty. Interestingly, this document is considered one of the oldest international peace treaties whose text has survived to this day. At that time, the power of Egypt seemed unshakable. His wealth impressed his neighbors. Temples became increasingly magnificent. Pharaohs were considered almost gods. But no empire lasts forever. New forces were already appearing on the horizon, which would soon change the map of the ancient world. The decline of the empire, from Cleopatra to an immortal legacy, no empire remains powerful forever. Even a state that seemed invincible for centuries eventually began to lose its strength. After the reign of Ramesses II, ancient Egypt increasingly faced internal crises. Pharaohs succeeded one another faster and faster. Local nobility became more influential, and neighboring states watched closely as the once great empire weakened. By this time, the world around Egypt had changed significantly. In the Middle East, the power of Assyria was growing, a state that created one of the strongest armies of its time. Assyrian warriors were famous for their discipline, the use of iron weapons, and new methods of warfare. In the 7th century BC, they invaded Egypt and even captured the ancient capital, Memphis. Although Assyrian rule did not last long, it served as a warning. Egypt was no longer an invincible state. Soon a new rival appeared, the Persian Empire. In 525 BC, the Persian king Cambyses II defeated the Egyptian army at the Battle of Pelusium. From that moment on, Egypt became one of the provinces of the vast Persian state. There is a popular legend that during this battle, the Persians used cats as a living shield, knowing about the special attitude of the Egyptians toward these animals. Although this story is widely known, most modern historians consider it unlikely or significantly exaggerated. It rather demonstrates how important a place cats held in the culture of ancient Egypt. Over the next 2 centuries, power over the country repeatedly passed from Egyptian rulers to the Persians and back. But decisive changes came in 332 BC. It was then that a young commander, whose name had already become a legend, arrived on the banks of the Nile: Alexander the Great. Unlike many previous conquerors, he did not destroy Egyptian shrines. On the contrary, the priests proclaimed him the legitimate pharaoh. For the Egyptians, he became a liberator from Persian rule. It was Alexander who ordered the founding of a new city on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Thus, Alexandria was born. Eventually, it became one of the largest cities of the ancient world, a center of science, trade, and culture. It was here that the famous Library of Alexandria was created, which, according to various estimates, could have held hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Scholars from all corners of the world came here to study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, geography, and philosophy. After Alexander's death, his empire collapsed. Egypt went to one of his generals, Ptolemy. Thus began the era of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Although the new rulers were of Greek origin, they quickly adopted many Egyptian traditions. They held the title of pharaoh, built temples in the traditional style, and supported ancient religious rites. It was to this dynasty that the most famous woman of ancient Egypt belonged, Cleopatra VII. Despite popular belief, she was not ethnically Egyptian. Her ancestors came from Macedonia. But Cleopatra became the first ruler of her dynasty to learn the Egyptian language and actively used local traditions to strengthen her power. Cleopatra was extremely educated. Ancient authors claim that she spoke several languages and was well-versed in mathematics, philosophy, politics, and diplomacy. Her main goal was to preserve Egypt's independence at a time when the Roman Republic was becoming a new great power. That is why her fate was closely intertwined with the history of 2 of the most famous Romans. First, Julius Caesar. Later, Mark Antony. Their union was not only a romantic story, but also a political move. Cleopatra tried to protect her state by using diplomacy in the face of Rome's rapid rise to power. However, in 31 BC, a decisive naval battle took place near Cape Actium. Octavian's fleet won a victory over the forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. A year later, they both died. According to the most famous legend, Cleopatra committed suicide by allowing a venomous cobra to bite her. However, modern historians cannot say with certainty whether this is exactly what happened. After her death, Egypt finally became a province of Rome. This marked the end of the more than 3,000-year history of independent Egyptian civilization. But its influence on humanity was only just beginning. The Romans admired Egyptian culture. They transported obelisks to their cities, adopted certain religious cults, and studied the knowledge accumulated by Egyptian priests. Centuries passed. Temples were gradually covered by sand. Hieroglyphs ceased to be understood. It seemed that the history of ancient Egypt would remain a silent mystery forever. This lasted for almost 1,500 years. Everything changed in 1799 when French soldiers during Napoleon's campaign found a black stone slab that went down in history as the Rosetta Stone. On it, the same text was written in 3 languages. It became the key to deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs. In 1822, the French scholar Jean-François Champollion was able to read ancient Egyptian inscriptions for the first time. After more than a millennium of silence, ancient Egypt has spoken again. Archaeologists began uncovering tombs, temples, and entire cities. The findings increasingly changed our understanding of this civilization. Today we know that the Egyptians were not just skilled builders. They created one of the first calendars, which consisted of 365 days. They developed medicine, performed complex surgeries, and described methods for treating many diseases. They knew how to calculate the areas of land plots, build massive structures with incredible precision, and organize the work of tens of thousands of people. Their achievements influenced the development of Greece, Rome, and through them, modern civilization. More than 5,000 years have passed since the first settlements appeared on the banks of the Nile. During this time, empires, peoples, and borders have changed, but the pyramids still rise above the desert. The Sphinx continues to look silently to the east, and the Nile, just as it did thousands of years ago, carries its waters across the entire country. Perhaps this is where the greatest miracle of ancient Egypt lies, not just in its majestic monuments, not just in the riddles of the pharaohs, but in the fact that a civilization born thanks to one river left a mark on world history that has not disappeared even after 5 millennia. And when we look at the Giza pyramids today, we see more than just ancient structures. We see proof that the human desire to create, build, and leave a memory of oneself is capable of outlasting entire eras.